Good day, grade 12 learners. Welcome to today's Life Sciences lesson. My name is Sina Sekheche, but I'm not alone. I am with my co-presenter, Vedika Maharaj. And as usual, this lesson is brought to you by the Gauteng Department of Education in collaboration with Saibono Discovery Center. Right, so today we are going to look at the topic Human Reproduction Part 2. So under Part 2 of Human Reproduction, we are going to cover the menstrual cycle, fertilization, and gestation. Right? Let us look at the objectives that we need to achieve at the end of this lesson. So it means you are going to pay attention and trace the objectives so you see whether you are able to know this content or you do not. Right, and if you do not, you go to your exam guideline, you ask your teacher, and you also discuss with your peers. But at the end of this lesson, this is what you must know. You must be able to explain the role of various hormones in the menstrual cycle. So there are hormones that are controlling the menstrual cycle process. You need to know those 4 hormones, know them by name, and also know their roles. And you must also be able to describe the events of the menstrual cycle. So menstrual cycle is a process, so there are certain events that are taking place. You need to be able to describe all of those events that are taking place. You must have a clear understanding of the terminology in order to study for case studies related to the menstrual cycle. You know, terminology plays a very huge role in life sciences. Then you need to understand your terminology when you are answering questions such as case studies or investigative type of questions. And 1.2 question in your question paper is always terminology. Then you must be able to know your terminology. Then you must be able to describe fertilization, implantation, and gestation. So what is happening through these, in these processes that we've just mentioned. You must also be able to know the functions of the chorion, the chorionic villi, the amnion, the amniotic cavity, amniotic fluid, the umbilical cord, and the placenta. So this is quite a lot of parts that you need to understand and know their functions. So, and also distinguish between the differences of these parts, because you see others share almost, their names are almost similar. So you need to be able to say this is the amniotic cavity, amniotic fluid. So you need to pay attention to those. So these are all the objectives that you need to achieve at the end of this lesson. So when we start the lesson, you keep this in mind and then you check if you are able to achieve all of these objectives. Right, so we'll start with the pre-knowledge. By now, you must be able to know the structure of the female reproductive system. Now, the reproductive system of the female has the primary female sex organs that are situated in the pelvic cavity on either side of the uterus, and those are called the ovaries. So the ovaries are your primary female sex organs. So when you studied the structure, you did study that these ovaries are situated on either side and they are held together by the fallopian tube, and then the fallopian tube will therefore lead into the uterus. Then you learned all of that when you were studying only just the anatomy. Then each ovary is surrounded by a layer of diploid cell. You also did oogenesis. So oogenesis is where you learned that these diploid cells, the geminal epithelial is going to divide to produce a haploid ova from being 2N to N. So this is the information that you learned prior. We're going to use this information building on further. Right, and then you also learned that the functions of the ovaries are to produce and to release ova. Without the ovaries, we cannot have ova being released and being produced, because the follicles have to work in producing this ova. Then also they produce the female hormone, estrogen, and progesterone. So these are the functions of the ovaries. So much details is going to be looked into of how these ovaries are functioning. So let's go into our functioning, but before we do that, let's look deeper into our ovary. So I would like for you to draw a label diagram of a cross section through the ovary, indicating the structures before ovulation, during ovulation, and after ovulation. So in this case, you must now think, when you were talking about oogenesis, you explored the primary follicles, you explored that the germinal epithelium is going to be the one that is forming the ova. Now we want you to see what is happening, what are those parts inside your ovaries. So let us look through each part together as a baseline. Right, so in your ovary, this is what you're going to find. The first thing that you are going to find are your primary follicles. As we talk and go on, you will see where we get these primary follicles. Where do they come from? So remember, hence you needed to know that the germinal epithelium is there and forming what? Oogenesis. So these primary follicles, these smaller cells that you see there, we refer to them as primary follicles. What do they contain? They contain an immature ovum. So it means this ovum still needs to go and to undergo processes or steps where it is going to mature. Then as time goes on, these primary follicles, they are going to grow and develop much further into what we call the secondary follicles. Now these secondary follicles, you see them, they are now much bigger than the primary follicles, and they still have what? There in the middle, you still have your immature ovum. So this ovum is still immature. So you see this one there in the middle, but when you look at the follicle is much bigger. Then you move to the next one. When you move to the next one, you see now a much bigger follicle, which we refer to a mature Graphian follicle. Now this follicle is the one that is mature. When you just say mature, it will give you a point to say, how is our ovum going to be? Because this is a developing stage, our ovum is therefore also developing and it is maturing. So in the Graphian follicle, you see this ovum that you were seeing in, from the first stage, which was immature. Look at it now in the Graphian follicle. The Graphian follicle contains now a mature ovum. Then, as time goes on, remember this is a cycle. So a cycle takes place over a period of time. Then our mature follicle will therefore rupture. It will therefore rupture. You see there is rupturing here, rupture. But I want us to go through this process in details when we talk about the hormones. But for now, we talk about what we see here on this diagram. So when it ruptures, it releases what? An ovum. And therefore, after releasing this ovum, it will therefore become, remember we are still talking about our Graphian follicle. Therefore, it changes the name. Look now, after it has ruptured, it becomes yellow. Do you see now the color is now yellow? And we call it now what? The corpus luteum. And this corpus luteum also has a function. So the functions of all of these parts or the cells in the different stages will be explored with the content that we are going to learn today. Then you have your blood vessels. So this is the baseline that you need to have. Then let's take a look at the terminology that you need to be able to know when you delve into this topic. You need to know what is an acrosome. You've already done that when you were doing the sperm. It contains the enzymes found in the head of the sperm cell. Then the amniotic fluid. This is the fluid that protects the human embryo against injuries and large-scale temperature changes. So where do you find the amniotic fluid? You need to know, right? Then because you studied the amniotic egg. Then the blastocyst or the blastula, you're going to learn about that today, but you need to know what is a blastocyst. It is a hollow ball of cells formed from the zygote. Then you will see when the zygote starts forming and developing, it will form a zygote. The chorion, the outermost membrane found in the embryo or in the fetus. So this is now also on your amniotic egg, what you studied. Then copulation. Copulation is the introduction of the male sex organ into the female sex canal, followed by a discharge of semen. So this is a scientific or a biological term explaining this process here. The endometrium, when we talk about the endometrium, which part is that? The lining of the uterus where implantation of the embryo occurs. The fallopian tube, you've also spoken about the fallopian tubes. It is the part of the female reproductive system where fertilization occurs. Right, this is very important for today's lesson also. You need to know fertilization takes place where? In the fallopian tube. Then fertilization, when the nucleus of the sperm fuses with the nucleus of the ovum. Very important. You will see when this is discussed. So it's not only just the sperm cell and the ova, they are nucleuses. Then follicle stimulating hormone, the hormone responsible for the development of the follicles. Then we can look at, there's a lot of terminology. Gestation, what is gestation? The period between fertilization and birth. Right, I would like for you to take time, write all of these terms. And as we go through the lesson and explaining all of these, write the definitions or the descriptions on the side to test yourself if you are able to grasp this vast terminology that we have under this section. Right. Then we're going to start with our menstrual cycle. This is a beautiful animation. I would like for you to take time to look at what is happening there. Basically, this is what is happening during the menstrual cycle. But this does not happen overnight, or it does not happen as fast as it is happening in this animation. The menstrual cycle takes place over a period of 28 days under normal circumstances. We know that situations differ and there are other conditions or medical conditions that may affect this process. But under normal circumstances, it should take for about period of about 28 days, and it is divided into two, which is the ovarian cycle, meaning what is happening in the ovaries, and the uterine cycle, what is happening in the uterus. Then we're going to go deeper into it and dissect to say what is happening inside the ovary, what is happening inside the uterus during the menstrual cycle. So what is happening inside the ovaries, we call it the ovarian cycle. What is happening inside the uterus, we call it the uterine cycle. Right. So we said that there are 4 hormones that are controlling the menstrual cycle. The cycle that you saw that was animated, where you see the ovaries releasing an ovum and then it being discharged with blood through menstruation, that whole animation, that process that takes 28 days is controlled by hormones. So how many hormones are controlling that process? 4. What are they namely? We have FSH, we have LH, estrogen, and progesterone. So FSH is the follicle stimulating hormone that is secreted by what? The pituitary gland. So you need to remember there are 2 hormones that are secreted by the pituitary gland, and there are 2 hormones that are secreted by the ovaries itself. So we can summarize them as FOLP. FOLP, if you can follow this acronym, FOLP, please write it somewhere. F, that stands for FSH. O stands for estrogen. So this will be your second hormone. This will be your first hormone. L stands for luteinizing hormone, which is number 3. And then the last hormone being progesterone, hormone number 4. Then you need to know what are the functions of these hormones. Follicle stimulating hormone, the name says it all. It stimulates the development or the growth of the follicle. Where? You just saw in the ovaries where you find the follicles. So this process will be happening where? In the ovaries. That is, the follicles, they need to be stimulated to develop. Then luteinizing hormone stimulates ovulation. Ovulation is that process that happens on day 14. We'll talk about it, where there is that rupturing. You saw the Graafian follicle rupturing and releasing an ovum. So that happens on a specific day and it releases an ovum. So that whole process, when it happens, we call it ovulation. And normally it happens in that 28-day cycle. It happens on day 14. Then you have estrogen. Estrogen's function is to thicken the endometrium. So the function there is to thicken the endometrium on your uterus. And progesterone, it maintains that thickness. So you see these two, they work hand in hand. So the progesterone is the one that is going to maintain that thickness of the endometrium in order to maintain pregnancy if there is such. So these are the functions of the hormones, loosely or scattered, not in sequence. But when you want to learn the menstrual cycle correctly, it is better for you to learn it in terms of what is happening when and what is the effect. So what is being stimulated, what is going to be secreted, and what is going to be the effect thereof. So this is where now we are going to follow the FORP method. Hence it was important for you to write the FORP so you can see the sequence of how these hormones are secreted. Then we're gonna go to, this is a diagram that is showing you the ovarian cycle. Remember the ovarian cycle, we are going to start here. You see where it says numerous follicles. Remember, these follicles are there because FSH, remember, you see the blood vessels. These are blood vessels. Remember, in the blood is a transport system. It transports all the hormones, all the nutrients. But in this case, we want it to transport hormones. So the blood vessels will be bringing blood that has a high concentration of follicle stimulating hormone. Then the follicles are therefore going to be stimulated to do what? To develop. So you see, as they start to develop, they are going to secrete one hormone that we spoke about. This is hormone number 2. Remember, hormone number 2, estrogen. Therefore, then our follicles are going to grow and mature together with the ovum that is inside those follicles. And as they grow and mature, the ovum also grows and matures, and estrogen is therefore also still secreted until we get to this day where you see now our follicle has grown into the Graafian follicle, and this Graafian follicle therefore becomes ruptured on day 14. This is what we were talking about, day 14. And when it ruptures on day 14, it releases an ovum. This is what we call ovulation. And therefore, after the ovum has been released, this Graafian follicle will then change its name and becomes a corpus luteum. You see this yellow body here? We call it a corpus luteum. Right. It's written here, the corpus luteum. It is that yellow body. And once this corpus luteum is formed, also it is going to secrete another hormone, which is progesterone. So we see, looking at the events of what is happening in the ovaries, we are able to trace that the follicles are going to secrete hormone, estrogen, and then after the follicle has ruptured, the Graafian follicle has ruptured, it is then going to become a corpus luteum, which is going to secrete hormone progesterone. This is how we say the two hormones are secreted by the ovaries. So then when pregnancy takes place, or if pregnancy does not take place in this ovary, you will start to see the corpus luteum degenerating. But if pregnancy was to take place, this corpus luteum was going to keep on getting bigger and bigger, and then maintaining what? The level of progesterone, or keep on continuing to produce progesterone. Because why do we need this progesterone to be secreted? Remember the function. The function is to maintain the thickness of the endometrium. So because the baby is going to be embedded on the endometrium, you want that endometrium to be more vascular and glandular. Right, so that is what is happening in the ovaries. So going into detail now. The ovaries, remember we said the female structure when we started with our baseline that has 2 ovaries. Now the ovaries, they take turns to produce a mature ovum. So if this month it was the left ovum, the following month is going to be the right ovum, and then they will alternate just like that. So it's not 2 in 1 month. Right. Then we are going to trace what is happening now looking at this diagram here. Inside the ovary, the primary follicle will develop into a mature Graafian follicle. So we start at 1. You see this one here. This is what we are going to call our primary follicles. Our primary follicles are going to develop, and becomes a, primary until they are secondary follicles, until now they are called what? Our Graafian follicles. So when you see now they are called, they've become the Graafian follicles, what is going to happen next? You expect everything here to be mature. Then what is going to happen? The ovum is located inside the Graafian follicle. Do you see now here is the ovum? The gray part represents the ovum. Then what is going to happen in the next stage? On day 14, remember we said this is day 14. On day 14 of the menstrual cycle, ovulation. So this is ovulation. What is ovulation? It is where now the Graafian follicle ruptures and releases an ovum. Right, it's going to do what? It's going to burst and release the ovum into the fallopian tube. I like this diagram here because already it shows you where it is going. It is going inside the fallopian tube. You see, it's going there. So that is what is happening there. And then remnants of the Graafian follicle. So what is left of the Graafian follicle here? The yellow body is going to develop into the corpus luteum. So this here is what we call our corpus luteum. Then our corpus luteum will secrete hormone progesterone. Right here, these follicles are secreting hormone estrogen. Right. So as it goes now, the Graafian follicle, the corpus luteum, the Graafian follicle, the corpus luteum. The corpus luteum, this yellow body here, as it develops, then it will start to disintegrate if pregnancy did not take place. So once you start seeing disintegrating or becoming smaller, then you know that pregnancy did not take place. Then what is happening inside the endometrium? Remember we said the menstrual cycle is divided into 2, which is the ovarian cycle and the uterine cycle. Now let's check what is happening inside the uterus in all of these 28 days. So the endometrium is going to break down and is released. This lasts for approximately 4 to 7 days. Now here, this is where the menses are taking place. The menses, meaning the person is going through their menstrual bleeding. So this can take about approximately 4 to 7 days. This is now the uterus, the lining shedding. Then the endometrium is stimulated by estrogen to become thicker and develop more blood cells and blood. So you see now, why is it developing? Because of the influence of the hormones, it is now going to do what? It prepares for pregnancy by doing what? By becoming more, having more blood vessels and becoming more thicker. That is under the influence of hormone what? Estrogen. We've already spoken about that hormone. Then progesterone. In that uterine cycle, as it starts being released by the corpus luteum, it is going to have an effect on this lining, on the endometrium. It's going to make it what? It's going to make the endometrium to become even thicker. Remember, it maintains the thickness. So you see now, as the day goes, as the progesterone is being released high, it is going to make our endometrium to become even more thicker. Then this happens to prepare for possible implantation. So if fertilization was to take place and a positive one is pregnancy is formed, then that zygote, you would want that to embed on a richly and a nutritious endometrium. So progesterone is there for that. If that happens, then if fertilization does not take place, then the endometrium tears away. What is that? When it tears away, it means it's starting all over again. That is when you're going to start seeing what? This blood, and then the whole process will start again. Now we've spoken about the hormones here and there. let us take a look at all the events of the menstrual cycle following our famous acronym FOL. Let us start with, we want to see now we are tracing what hormone is being released and what influence is it going to have and where. So we start with our F. So on this graph, you need to check what is happening in the uterus. The first one is the uterus. The second one, you must check what is happening in the ovaries or the ovarian hormones. Then you must check what is happening in the pituitary gland, which hormones are going to be secreted. Then body temperature, sometimes it will tell you. Then the most focus will also be what are the events in the uterus, or in the ovaries, and what influence will that have. So let us start now. You now see what each line represents on this graph. This is a menstrual cycle over a period of 28 days. Now we want to see what is happening. You can say from day 0 to about day 6 or 7. You can say that this is just an estimate. What is happening there? Let us start with the pituitary, because we start with follicle stimulating hormone, the F. We want to trace our first hormone, which is F, follicle stimulating hormone. Follicle stimulating hormone is a hormone that is stimulated by the pituitary. Then you're going to go to the pituitary and check. Okay, they say follicle stimulating hormone is the one that has a light blue line, this one, FSH. Right, so this light blue one, you start seeing after the menses. Remember, when you are going through the menses, the quality or the secretion is going to be less, but now after the cycle is starting, you start to see now the increase. So let us check if we have that. So you start seeing that the follicle stimulating hormone is stimulating, it is secreted more. You see it's going high. And when it goes high, where is going to be the influence? This is going to go into the ovaries here. You see, goes to the ovaries to do what? To stimulate the development of the follicles. So you see, these follicles was very small, but now here it's becoming big. This is under the influence of FSH. FSH stimulates their development. Why do you want them to develop? Because we want them to mature and release that ovum. Then after they are now developing, look at this one. It is now called a Graafian follicle because it is mature. What is going to happen? These follicles, as they develop, they are releasing a second hormone. Which is the second hormone? The second hormone is our estrogen. Let us go look at the levels of estrogen. What are they doing? Is it in correlation with what we are seeing in the ovaries? We go now to our graph. We start seeing now the level of estrogen going up. Why is it going up? It is because now the follicles have developed and they are secreting more estrogen. So this estrogen is going up. And as it goes up, it keeps on going up. Then what's going to happen on day 14? On day 14, the pituitary gland, look, the pituitary gland is going to secrete this magic hormone. This is our third hormone, LH, luteinizing hormone. This luteinizing hormone is going to rupture what? The Graafian follicle and makes it to release the ova. So do you see everything here is on the same line? Is when the LH is up, right? So when it ruptures and releases an ovum, what is going to happen now? The ovum is released and the level of LH is high. Then after that, remember this Graafian follicle, after it has ruptured, the remnants or the remaining parts after the rupturing, they are going to form what we call the yellow body, which is called the corpus luteum. Corpus luteum, as soon as it forms, it is going to do what? It is going to secrete hormone progesterone. Let us go look at the level of progesterone. Progesterone here, you see, it correlates with the corpus luteum having been formed, and then you see the level of progesterone going up. It has always been there, but now that the corpus luteum is there, it's up. But I want us to go back and trace the influences of these hormones in the uterine wall. What was happening when the estrogen was being released by this? Look at the thickening of the endometrium. Remember, it thickens the endometrium. And then also the corpus, the progesterone, after being secreted by the corpus luteum, what happens to the thickening? It goes up. Now, the key thing here is to look at your graph and see what is happening with your corpus luteum as time goes on. When you see the corpus luteum disintegrating, then you know that pregnancy did not take place. Then it means the progesterone levels needs to go down. You see now progesterone goes down because the corpus luteum is now disintegrated. It is no longer there to secrete progesterone. And when it is not secreting progesterone, the endometrium lining is therefore not maintained. This is where now the shedding is going to take place and the whole process is going to start again. I hope now you've traced the FOLP. You've traced all how these hormones are working together. Then when you look at this graph, I want you to look for it for only just 5 seconds and check what is different here. Here, let me just direct you because then it is a whole lot of information from this graph. This graph is different from the previous graph because the corpus luteum is continuing. You see, it is not disintegrating, meaning it keeps on secreting the level, the hormone progesterone. And when it keeps on secreting the hormone progesterone, look at what is happening to the lining. You see now the progesterone level, look, it's going flat. It's going flat this way. It's maintained. So when it's maintained like that, it is maintained to keep, also to maintain the lining of the endometrium. Now it means fertilization has taken place, so we want to maintain pregnancy. So this is what is different with this graph. So to see if fertilization took place or not, the key is on the size of the corpus luteum. Right, this is just another flow diagram to show you how the FOLP works. So let us look at the negative feedback of progesterone and FSH. Now, when someone is pregnant, or if there's no pregnancy, there is a relationship between the level of progesterone and the level of FSH. Remember, FSH is going to stimulate the development of the follicles. If someone is pregnant, do you want the follicles to keep on developing? No. Or if someone is not pregnant, do you want progesterone levels to keep on being secreted? No. So there is a negative feedback for those two hormones. So let us check what happens for this negative feedback mechanism. You did negative feedback in grade 11, so now you understand what that means. So when the other hormone is secreted in more quantities, the other one will be secreted in less quantities, and vice versa. And please take note, there is no situation where hormones are not secreted. Please, when you say that the hormone FSH stops or it inhibits, just say it is secreted in less quantities. Then the other one that is active will be in more quantities, because there is no situation where hormones are not secreted at all. Right, so we're going to start here. When we start here, we check the increased level of progesterone. Going back to what we've just learned on the previous chart, we saw that to maintain pregnancy, the level of progesterone needs to be maintained. Right. Now, when the level of progesterone is increased, remember the hormones travel in blood. This information is going to reach the brain. It's going to reach the pituitary gland. Let's say the pituitary gland. As the blood passes through the pituitary gland is going to detect that there is a high amount of progesterone in the blood. Therefore, what is it going to do after it detects that? It is going to secrete less. You see, less FSH. Why? Because we don't want those follicles to start developing because this person now is pregnant, we don't want new follicles to start developing. So it is going to secrete less FSH. And this less FSH is going to have an effect on what? On the development of the ovaries. So it's going to cause the follicles to develop less in the ovaries. And it is going to cause what? The estrogen level to decrease. Why? Because this estrogen is secreted by the follicles in the ovaries. So if the follicles are not developing, it means the follicles will not be secreting hormone estrogen. Therefore, this is going to inhibit the pituitary gland, and it is going to secrete what? Less LH. So if there's less estrogen, also the pituitary gland is going to detect that and say there is less estrogen. Therefore, we are not going to release more LH on day 14 because there is no follicle that was maturing that is going to rupture on day 14. Therefore, we are going to release less LH. Who is that? That is the pituitary gland. Then this less LH is going to cause no ovulation because there was no follicle from the start. So high levels of progesterone means less levels of estrogen. Less level of estrogen means less LH, because then there is no ovulation. So this is the negative feedback of how these hormones are working to balance one another and to maintain other processes that your body can run smoothly, that everything does not happen all at once in chaos. So your body is designed to be able to balance its internal environment in this way, in this negative feedback. Right. Then I would like us to do an activity. So this activity, I'm going to give you 2 minutes. 2 minutes to do this question, and then we'll look at the answers together. Right. So I think answering these questions was quite a breeze for you. You now know what's happening in the ovaries, you know what's happening in the pituitary, you know what's happening in the endometrium, which is your uterine wall. Right. So name hormone V. Let us look at our diagram. Hormone V. I hope you have the skill of answering questions with diagrams. The first thing that you do when you get a diagram is to go try to label all the labels there or make note of what you see happening there. Then you come to the questions. So when you come across these questions in your exam or in your test, that's what you do. You want to see your papers being filled with notes or answers there on the labels. Right. So name hormone V. So this is our V. This hormone, as you see the arrow, it comes from this cell here. And you know what we call this cell here is a follicle. So this follicle inside ovaries is secreting which hormone? Secreting hormone estrogen. If you said estrogen, then you get a mark. Describe what effect hormone V has on the lining of the endometrium. So this hormone, once it is secreted, what is the effect thereof on the endometrium? It increases the thickness of the endometrium. That is the function of estrogen. So you see now, you start seeing, even on your diagram, you see it is thickening. Explain the importance of the endometrium lining. Why does the endometrium lining has to be thick? And sometimes they can ask you this word, importance. Please look out for it. Sometimes they can say, what is the significance of the endometrium lining? They are still asking you the same. Why do we need the endometrium lining? We need it to provide a place where the embryo is going to implant. You will see just now that implantation, it needs the endometrium lining that is thick, that is more glandular and vascular. So that lining is important. The importance, it is important because it provides a place for that embryo to implant or to attach. But the correct terminology or biological term to use there is implantation, to implant. And the placenta also forms from that lining. So it's important for that, for those purposes. Name hormone X. Hormone X, let us all look at it. This is hormone X. You see it says comes from the pituitary, and you see it's going to make this thing. Look, what body did it form there? Right, this hormone is luteinizing hormone. You see what is happening? Look at what X is going. It is forcing this thing to rupture or causing it to rupture. So this process here, what is happening is ovulation. Once you see that ovum being released, you know that is ovulation, and that is under the influence of hormone, luteinizing hormone or LH. Give the functions of hormone X in the menstrual cycle. So this hormone X, what is it responsible for? Already from the previous question, you have your answer here. It is produced to burst the Graafian follicle. This is what is happening here. To release the ovum, or you can say it stimulates ovulation. After that, after all, rupturing of the Graafian follicle to release an ovum is called ovulation. Then it also stimulates the development of the corpus luteum. See here, this body, the development of that yellow body is stimulated also by hormone LH. Right. Now, which hormone is secreted by structure Y? This structure here. So we've established that this is the corpus luteum from the previous question. So which hormone is secreted by that? It is progesterone. You must just know the yellow body releases progesterone. Name two functions of the hormone secreted by structure Y. So this progesterone that is secreted, what is its function? The function is to prepare the endometrium for implantation. Remember, because it maintains the thickness and it thickens the endometrium and then maintains that thickness for pregnancy. Or you can also say it inhibits the secretions of FSH. We've spoken about this when we were talking about the negative feedback. Right, so those are the functions of progesterone. Right. We've done this one. Oh, this is a new activity. You get a bonus. Name hormone Z. So what hormone is this? This one here. You see this hormone secreted by the pituitary gland? What hormone is that? It is FSH. How do you know that it is FSH? Because you start seeing that it has stimulated the development of the follicles. So even if you have the answer, I would still ask you a question on top of the answer to explain to me, why do you say FSH? So you see, having the answers prior does not guarantee you understanding what is happening. Right. Name one function of hormone Z. This function, the hormone of this function, the function of this hormone is to stimulate the growth or the development of the follicles, which is what we are seeing here. Then what will happen to the levels of hormone Z in the bloodstream if the level of hormone secreted by structure Y? So if structure Y secretes a hormone, which is progesterone, we've established, what is going to happen to the level of the hormone secreted at Z? So at Z, we have LH, at Y, we have progesterone. So this is that negative feedback we were talking about. What did we say? We said that the level of progesterone is going to decrease the amount of FSH. No, this is FSH. FSH being secreted. Right. So it means it will decrease. That is what is going to happen. Then the second activity. I would like us to do this activity together. The graph below shows the levels of two hormones that are secreted by the pituitary gland. Very important. Remember, we've spoken about 4 hormones, and not all of them are secreted by the pituitary, not all of them are secreted by the ovaries. Now here on this graph, we expect to see 2 hormones that are secreted by the pituitary. At the back of your mind, you already know what are those 2 hormones that are secreted by the pituitary. That is going to be the ones with the alphabets, FSH and LH. You see, those are the 2 during the menstrual cycle. Now, state 2 functions of hormone B. We go to a graph now, we check. This is hormone B. And you see, because this hormone is secreted in large quantities on day 14, then you know definitely this hormone needs to be LH. Because we said on day 14, LH is released. So what is the function of this LH? We've just spoken about it on the previous activity. We said this hormone is going to stimulate ovulation, number 1. Then stimulate the development of the corpus luteum. That yellow body is formed because of this hormone is secreted in large quantities after the rupturing. Right. Explain why a female who is struggling to get pregnant, A, may be given pills containing hormone A as a treatment. So hormone A, because they said these hormones are secreted by the pituitary, there are only 2. Then hormone A will therefore be FSH, no matter what. So why would a woman who is struggling to get pregnant be given pills that contains more FSH? Remember, FSH it stimulates what? The development of the follicles. So you want what in this woman? High concentration of FSH is going to stimulate more follicles for this woman. More follicles, therefore, more ova. Because if you have more follicles, remember, inside the follicles, what do you have? You have the ova. So if you have more ova, what are the chances of falling pregnant? Increases the chances to fall pregnant. So you give FSH to develop more follicles, more ova, more chances of falling pregnant. So it's more. Then still we have our LH and our FSH. Explain why a female who is struggling to get pregnant will have her levels of hormone B constantly monitored. So hormone B, LH, is going to be constantly monitored. They're going to check if she has high concentrations of this hormone. Why? Why do we do? The doctors still need to monitor LH. Remember the function of LH. This is going to show that a peak in hormone B, if it is high, a peak means high levels. A peak in hormone B will indicate that ovulation is about to happen. What does that mean for fertilization? If LH is high, then you know that ovulation is about to happen, meaning the ovum is about to be released. And if it is about to be released, it is available. It means it is now available for fertilization. This is where the doctors will encourage the partners to go and try for pregnancy, because there are high chances of falling pregnant, because now ovulation has just taken place. It means the ova has just been released, or is about to be released. So that is very, very important. Then explain how the levels of hormone A on days 0 to 5. So here, hormone A, FSH, will differ in a pregnant female. A pregnant female, FSH. If you are pregnant, do you still want follicles to be developing? That's how you start formulating your answer. You say, the levels will remain low because the progesterone levels during pregnancy will inhibit, this is that negative feedback, will inhibit the pituitary gland from secreting FSH, or which is hormone A. So the level of hormone A therefore will be less. So describe the secretion of the ovarian hormones and their role in the menstrual cycle. So how are they secreted? First, the Graafian follicle, which is the mature follicle, is going to secrete estrogen. Meaning we want to know where do they come from and what is going to be their effect, their role. This estrogen is going to stimulate the thickening of the endometrium. Then the corpus luteum is going to secrete progesterone, which increases the thickness of the endometrium. So those are the two hormones. Then this activity, I would like for you to continue with it when you get this presentation or when you get the slides, and understand how we get to the questions, right? So then I am going to leave it to my co-presenter, Vedika Maharaj, who is going to take you through fertilization, implantation, and gestation. Please, please, please pay attention, as all of this is very important for your exams. Thank you so much.
Welcome back, grade 12 learners. My name is Vedika Maraj, and I'm going to take you through the rest of the lesson. Thank you to my colleague Sina, who took you through the menstrual cycle in such great detail, and I hope that you took down all the important points. Just to recap, what Sina has done, she has gone through the whole menstrual cycle with you, and just to remind you, it's made up of two different parts. We have the uterine cycle, we have the ovarian cycle, and we also have the hormonal interactions and the roles of all the different hormones. So as she explained to you, you need to know them as they are very important. Now we're going to move on to another topic, right? When we're going from the menstrual cycle. So as she explained to you, we have during the menstrual cycle, she explained to you a very important event that takes place, which was called ovulation. Do you remember which day that takes place on? Day 14. Yes, that's a very important event. It is when the Graafian follicle ruptures to release the ovum. Okay, so I want you to remember that as we go into the next part. But firstly, we need to have a look at terminology. Right, so the three terms I want us to look at now are copulation, fertilization, and implantation. And these three you also need to know. It's part of your syllabus. It's stipulated in the examination guidelines, so I want you to please take notice. So copulation, it's the introduction of the penis into the vagina, followed by the discharge of semen. Okay, that is called copulation. And this is specifically what I'm talking about over here in humans. Fertilization, it's the fusion of the haploid nucleus of the sperm cell and the haploid nucleus of the ovum to form a diploid zygote. Okay, and what I want you to remember here is meiosis. Remember we did meiosis, right, earlier on, and then also last week we did the introduction of human reproduction, and we did oogenesis. Do you remember that? And what do you remember what oogenesis is? It's the formation of ova. Yes. And then we have implantation. Lastly, it's the attachment of the blastocyst to the endometrium of the uterus at the start of pregnancy. Okay, so we are going to be looking at these last two terms especially in more detail. Okay, now as I said, during the menstrual cycle on day 14, the Graafian follicle is going to rupture and it's going to release an ovum. That ovum is released into the fallopian tube. Okay, and the fallopian tube has cilia. Okay, it's lined with ciliated columnar epithelium, and those cilia are going to actually cause that ovum to move along the fallopian tube, and it's going to sit nicely there, and it's going to wait for a sperm cell to come. So what's going to be happening then if a male and a female have to partake in sexual intercourse and copulation has to occur, right? Then as we said, that semen that will be discharged will travel up the vagina, through the cervix, up the uterus, all the way into the fallopian tube, and that's where it's going to make contact with the ovum, hopefully. Okay, so not all the sperm actually reach there. It's quite a distance for a small little sperm cell to swim, but there are some that do reach there. And now when they get to this point, what happens is all the sperm are going to basically surround this ovum, right? Or however many are going to reach up there. They're going to surround the ovum. And as we spoke about, before I speak about that, I want to talk about how does it propel itself? What causes the sperm cell to move? It propels itself by means of a tail. Remember we spoke about it last week. It's got a long tail. Using energy from mitochondria and fructose from the semen. The sperm continues to swim with spiral-like movements towards the ovum in the fallopian tube. Right, now it reaches the ovum, as I explained. I just wanted to explain to you what makes it move. Right, words like propel are important for you to remember, and the fact that there's mitochondria and fructose, right? So now, what happens is the head of one sperm cell is going to penetrate the membranous barrier around the ovum. And this is made possible by the enzymes of the acrosome. Okay, so the sperm head, remember it's got a tip and that tip has an acrosome, and inside that acrosome there are enzymes, and those enzymes are going to dissolve the barrier of the ovum so that the head of the sperm can penetrate into the ovum. Right, it's only going to happen with one sperm cell. Okay, that's what they say, the lucky one. Right, the one sperm cell. Then the mitochondria and the tail are going to fall away. It's only the head of the sperm that's going to enter the ovum. And then at that point, okay, so as we said, the sperm cell loses its tail and only the head enters. Now, where does this fusion part come in? Right? So before we get to the fusion part, now the head is inside, right? The ovum. Like I said, the neck and the tail, the mitochondria, the neck and the tail have fallen away. This membrane now becomes impenetrable. That means that it's going to have like a solid barrier now, and it's not going to be able to be penetrated by any other sperm. That's why we say it's become impenetrable to other sperm cells. The nuclei now of the male and the female are going to fuse. So remember that ovum, it had a haploid nucleus, right? And the sperm cell has a haploid nucleus. So once that head of the sperm enters the ovum, the two nuclei are going to fuse. And what do you know about it? If I have a haploid and I have a haploid, what am I going to get then once they fuse? We're going to have one nucleus now forming, and it's going to be a diploid. Yes, and that structure that forms is called a zygote. Okay, so we have an ovum originally, we had a sperm cell, the nuclei of the two fuse to form a diploid zygote. Okay, now this zygote is going to still be in the fallopian tube. But this zygote has to now develop into other structures. Okay, it's going to develop further, and then eventually it's going to develop into different stages that we are going to talk about now. And now once fertilization is basically the beginning part of possible pregnancy. Okay, because once fertilization occurs, remember, what did Sina tell you about that? She told you that the corpus luteum is going to remain active and it's going to continue to secrete progesterone. Okay, I want you to remember that in the back of your mind. We're going to come back to it again. So now we've got the zygote, and this zygote is going to develop further by a process called mitosis. It's going to then form 4 cells. So first it's a zygote. You can look at the bottom over here. We have a zygote. Then we have it's going to develop by mitosis into a 2-cell stage, a 4-cell stage, a 8-cell stage, and it's going to carry on dividing like that by mitosis until we have a solid ball of cells, which is called the morula. And then it's going to further develop into a blastocyst, which is a hollow ball of cells. It's also known as a blastula, blastocyst or blastula. And from the zygote stage to the 2 stage, the 4 stage and 8 stage, all of those stages, these structures are going to move. The structure is going to move along the fallopian tube due to the cilia, and then it's going to move into the uterus. And when it's its blastocyst stage, this is when it reaches the uterus near the endometrium, where we're going to have another process occurring. Okay, and this process is going to be called implantation. So what happens now is that this blastocyst is going to embed into the endometrium. And when it embeds into this endometrium, this is called implantation. Now, let's just back it up a little bit. So we spoke about it on day 14 during the menstrual cycle. We have the Graafian follicle, which is going to rupture, and it's going to release an ovum into the fallopian tube. The ovum is going to be there looking pretty, awaiting for the sperm cells to arrive. Right. Then what's going to happen now in the ovary? That's what's happening in the fallopian tube. What's happening now in the ovary? Sina told you that because of LH, that empty Graafian follicle is now going to be converted into a corpus luteum. And that corpus luteum is going to secrete progesterone. Right. Now, coming back to the fallopian tube. Now fertilization has occurred. Okay, and once that fertilization has occurred, what did we talk about happened in the ovary again? That corpus luteum is going to remain intact. And that corpus luteum is going to continue to secrete progesterone past day 21. Past day 28, it's going to continue to secrete progesterone. Right, now coming back to the uterus, what is happening? We had the sperm fertilization occurred, we had the development of the zygote, from the zygote into this blastocyst, and this blastocyst is now being embed into the endometrium. So that progesterone that's being secreted is what's causing the further thickening and maintaining of the endometrium for possible implantation. Okay, so that is how it all fits together. Right, this is just showing another representation of exactly what I just explained now. Okay, so what you need to understand here is that this is showing you the ovum, okay, and it's showing you a nucleus. Can you see how there's all these sperm cells are trying to penetrate, but only one is going to penetrate? So show to the next stage over here, where we have a sperm cell with an ovum, then we have a zygote. So can you see 23 haploid? 23 haploid equals to diploid 46 in the zygote. Then the zygote, so to remind you, the sperm cell and the ovum, they are gametes, right? And they have 23, they are haploid, they have 23 chromosomes because of a process called meiosis. Now we've got a diploid zygote, and we have a process called mitosis, because now we don't want to halve the number of chromosomes. Now we want to maintain the number of chromosomes, and we want there to be more cells. We want there to be growth and development. Okay, mitosis is associated with growth and development. So now it's going to grow, like we said, into this 4-cell structure. Then the module, it's not showing you, it skipped some stages in between here, but you know that it's going to go from 2 to 4 to 8, okay? And then we're going to have a modular, which is a solid ball of cells, and then the blastocyst, which is a hollow ball of cells, and then we are going to have the blastocyst, which embeds in the endometrium, and this is called implantation. So basically we have an embryo, right? Okay, so now after implantation, what's going to happen? So the implantation is like the initial part, right, where this ovum, this blastocyst is now in the endometrium. But now something is going to happen. As this blastocyst is going to grow, it's going to start forming extra embryonic membranes. Okay, so embryonic meaning of the embryo, extra meaning like the added layers, you would say. Okay, so these are the membranes. And there are two that I want you to know. They are the amnion and the chorion. So the amnion is the inner layer, which is filled with amniotic fluid. Then it has a chorion, which is an outermost layer. It forms finger-like projections which project into the endometrium, which are called chorionic villi. Okay, so I just want to go to the picture before we go into more detail to show you what I'm talking about. So this is the fetus, right? Here we have the amnion. Okay, this is the inner layer that I'm talking about, membrane. Then we've got the chorion here, which is the outer one. And then we have these large, lovely structures here, which are called the chorionic villi. Okay, they are the chorionic villi. And the chorionic villi is going to develop from the chorion. So we have the amnion, then we have the outer layer of the chorion. The chorion is going to form these projections, which are called chorionic villi, and they are going to become large and vascular. Okay, so I want to remind you, or think about this, that the chorionic villi form part of the fetus. It's part of the embryo. Okay, it's the membrane that belongs to the embryo, the chorionic villi, and it's embedding into the endometrium, which belongs to the mother. Okay, and then this chorionic villi, together with the endometrium of the mother, are forming the placenta. So I want you to understand that the placenta is made up of the embryonic part and the maternal part. The embryonic part being the chorionic villi and the maternal part being the endometrium, and together this forms the placenta. Okay, then what happens is we have the, oh yeah, and then something important to also mention is that the mother and the fetus and the maternal blood do not mix. They never mix, because the fetal blood is running through the chorionic villi and the maternal blood is running from the uterine wall and forming part of the endometrium in the placenta. Okay, but they don't mix. However, there is going to be diffusion taking place. Okay, we're going to talk about it a little bit just now. Let's talk about the umbilical cord. The umbilical cord develops between the fetus and the placenta. Okay, it consists of a hollow tube that contains 2 umbilical arteries and 1 umbilical vein. The umbilical arteries transport deoxygenated blood and nitrogenous waste, and the umbilical vein transports oxygenated blood and nutrients. Okay, so which way do these things go? Let's think about it now. If the arteries are going to transport deoxygenated blood and nitrogenous waste, which way do you think that's going to go? Is that going to go towards the mother, or is it going to go towards the fetus? It's going to go towards the mother. Yes, why? Because the baby, the fetus, is going to be producing this deoxygenated blood and nitrogenous waste. So this has to be expelled going via the umbilical cord to the placenta. Whereas the umbilical vein is going to take the oxygenated blood and nutrients, the nutrients coming from the mother, they're going to take it to, it's going to be going to the fetus. Now, how to remember how many arteries we have and how many veins? Okay, we have 2 umbilical arteries. I'm just drawing a smiley face. That's 2 A's there for 2 umbilical arteries and 1 umbilical vein, the V for the, so we have a little smiley face. Okay, so that's just to help you remember that there are 2 arteries and 1 vein. Right, now what I wanted to show you over here is that, you see, can you see how all these blood vessels, they are remaining within the chorionic villi, and these blood vessels over here, they are extending now, they are forming part of the placenta as well. So what's happening is diffusion can still occur. Okay, remember that blood does not leave the blood vessel. When learners come to grade 12, they forget that we learned that in grade 10. That blood does not leave the blood vessels. Okay, so diffusion can still occur of carbon dioxide, oxygen, and nutrients and nitrogenous waste. However, the blood is not going to mix. Right, so this just gives you another more detailed explanation or a detailed picture of what the umbilical cord looks like. You can see we have the 2 arteries and the 1 vein over there. And then we come to our last diagram before we get into the questions. This is now the picture of the uterus with the endometrium and the picture of the uterus and the endometrium. I just want to show something to you over here. Let's remember that we said it last week a lot as well, but remember that this is the uterine wall. The uterine wall is made up of muscle. Okay, there are 3 muscle layers actually, and then on this uterine wall we have the endometrium, which is built up every month. Okay, and that endometrium is like wallpaper. It's like wallpaper that goes on the uterine wall. Okay, so it's a lining that is on the uterine wall. The uterine wall is always going to be there. It's going to contract during menstruation, it contracts during birth. Okay, it's a muscle, whereas the endometrium is a lining. Okay, I really need you to understand that. Now, these are all the different parts that Sina mentioned to you at the beginning of the lesson that you need to know. You need to know the structure and the function of every single one of these. Okay, so we spoke about a lot of them, but the one that I want to focus into are the 2 that I want to focus into. Okay, let's actually start with the amnion, because we did speak about them, but we didn't talk about them in a lot of detail as we need to do in this slide. So the amnion, it's the inner layer. We spoke about that. It secretes amniotic fluid and protects the developing fetus. Now, what is the function of this amniotic fluid? It's a shock absorber. It protects the fetus against large temperature changes, and it protects the fetus against desiccation. Okay? Then we have the chorion. Remember I told you it is the outer extraembryonic membrane. It forms the chorionic villi, which form part of the placenta. What is the function of the chorionic villi? It's to provide maximum contact with maternal blood and forms part of the placenta. Okay, so remember I told you it embeds into the endometrium, so it's surrounded by the blood and the blood vessels and everything of the mother. Then we've got the umbilical cord. We spoke about that in detail, so you don't have to go through that again. Lastly, the placenta. Very important, you need to know all the functions of the placenta. Number one, gaseous exchange between the mother and the fetus, which we spoke about, providing nutrients to the fetus, which we spoke about, and after 12 weeks, the placenta is now going to secrete progesterone to maintain the pregnancy. Okay, so the corpus luteum is going to secrete progesterone until 12 weeks. After 12 weeks, the placenta is now going to secrete the progesterone. Right, then we have other functions. It also serves a protective function because it acts as a microfilter. It protects against pathogens, produces antibodies, and maintains the endometrium. Grade 12, please make sure that you know this diagram. Right, let's go into a few activities. The diagram below shows the events that take place in the female body. Identify the extraembryonic membrane. Okay, sorry, first we identify structure B. Yes, so we had to look at this. We've actually seen this diagram before, so I'm sure you'll be able to do this very quickly now. B is the zygote. D is the morula. E is the hollow ball, so it's the blastocyst or the blastula. So how do we identify these? We can see that B is the zygote because after fertilization happened, we now form that structure is then called the zygote. D is the morula because you can see it's a solid ball of cells, and E is the blastocyst because you can see it's a hollow ball of cells. Name the process taking place at A. What's taking place at A? You can see that the sperm cells are surrounding the ovum, so it has to be fertilization. Name the inner wall of the uterus where structure E implants. So where's E going to implant? It's going to implant into the endometrium. Yes, not the uterine wall, the endometrium. Okay. State the type of cell division taking place at C. It is mitosis. Why is it sorry, that's supposed to be mitosis. Why is it mitosis and not meiosis? It's because we now have growth and development. Okay, not the development of the gamete. We have growth and development. How many chromosomes are normally found in H? Okay, so normally how many are found? There are 23. Yes, why? Because this is an ovum, and in the ovum nucleus we're going to have a haploid number, which is 23. Identify the extraembryonic membrane G, and there we go. It's showing us the outermost membrane, which is the chorion. Okay, if they showed us the inner one, then it would be the amnion. Okay, now we move to another diagram. This one is showing a different one. In this picture, they're showing us an ovary, right? You can see this over here. This is the ovary. Then they're showing us a fallopian tube. And they are showing us part of the uterus, and you can see what's happening over here. Okay, they're even showing us the endometrium, and they're showing us that there are sperm cells here. They're showing us an ovum, so you can see more or less where this is going, right? So identify A. We already did. It's the fallopian tube. B is the ovary. Then we need to give two characteristics. How do we know it's the ovary? It's this oval structure and it's attached to the fallopian tube, right? And how do you know this is the fallopian tube? As Sina said, the fallopian tube is the tube that extends from the uterus to the ovary, right? Or between the uterus and the ovary. Give two characteristics of the endometrium that make it suitable for implantation. Right. Endometrium. So what is so special about this endometrium? It is rich in blood supply, or you can say it's vascular. It is also glandular and it is thick. Okay, you cannot talk about muscle here. You cannot talk about muscles because this is what learners did. They talked about muscles, but remember it's the endometrium and not the uterine wall. The uterine wall is muscular. The endometrium is glandular and vascular and thick. It's like spongy, you could say. And another thing I want to mention here is that, can you see that this stem of this question, this part here is called the stem. This part is is clearly indicating to you that this is part of the female reproductive system. So it's important, grade 12s, that you can see from the diagrams that you get is that you're not going to get the whole female reproductive system sometimes. They're going to give you a part of it. So you must be able to analyze the diagram, identify the different parts given to you so you can figure out which part they are actually showing you. Give 2 visible reasons why there's an increased chance of fertilization in this female. Okay, what are 2 visible reasons? So what can you see? Fertilization cannot occur if the sperm are not in the fallopian tube, right? Yes, so remember, the fallopian tube is the site of fertilization. So firstly, there are sperm cells in the fallopian tube. Secondly, ovulation has taken place. Okay, and how do we know that? An ovum has been released. So you can see here that ovulation is taking place. But if you did not realize that, you would even say that an ovum has been released because you can see now that there's an ovum that is present. Fertilization cannot occur if there are no ova and if there are no sperm cells. Now, this is a little bit of an application question. They're telling us about ectopic pregnancy. In an ectopic pregnancy, the fertilized ovum can become implanted in part A. This normally results in the death of the embryo and may endanger the mother's life. Explain why an ectopic pregnancy may result in the death of an embryo. Okay, so now this is an explained question. They're telling you that this is when fertilization happens in the fallopian tube, but it also gets implanted there. Now think about it. The fallopian tube is a tube. What do we know about an embryo? The blastocyst, where does it have to implant? In the endometrium. Why? What's so special about the endometrium? It's vascular, it's glandular, it has all of the properties in order to allow this embryo to develop and survive. But a fallopian tube, what does it have? Remember I told you, it is lined with ciliated columnar epithelium. So they do not have a placenta, for example. So this is what we actually need to explain. You need to say that the fallopian tube is unable to provide the space. Okay, that's another one. It's a tube, right? It is small. So it's unable to provide space. There is also no endometrium, so there's no blood supply to provide nutrients and to remove the waste. And there's no space in order for the embryo to develop. Okay, so you just needed to explain it just like that. Next question. Here we have another diagram of developing fetus in the female reproductive system. Membrane A is the chorion. Part D is the cervix. Okay, so here we have the chorion. B, we have the amniotic fluid. C, we have the umbilical cord. D is the cervix, and E is showing the placenta, I'm assuming, right? It shows chorionic villi there though, specifically. Chorionic villi. Give 2 functions of fluid B. Right, so fluid B over there, you know that I told you it's the amniotic fluid. It's to keep the fetus hydrated, regulate the temperature, act as a shock absorber, and it also allows free fetal movement. Explain how the development of the fetus would be affected if part C became completely blocked. Oh, imagine that. The umbilical cord is blocked. And what does the umbilical cord do? It's going to transport the oxygen and nutrients to the fetus. And it's going to transport the carbon dioxide and the waste to the mother. So if it is blocked, what's going to happen? Nitrogenous waste will not be excreted. It will accumulate in the fetus and resulting in underdevelopment or death of the fetus. Another thing that could happen is that you can either talk about how the nutrients are going to, how the nitrogenous waste is going to build up and become toxic, or you can talk about how the no oxygen will reach the fetus, and which also leads to poor development or lead to death of the fetus. Name 2 systems in the human body whose function is served by region E during gestation. Okay, so which 2 systems in the human body serve function is served by this part? Okay, so that is the excretory, digestive, respiratory, and immune. Yes, because this is the placenta. as I said earlier, it is the placenta. So it's going to take part as an excretory function, a digestive function, a respiratory function, and an immune. Okay, the placenta does all of these things. It's a miraculous organ. Describe the development of a fertilized ovum until implantation occurs. Okay, so we spoke about the zygote being formed. It's then going to divide by mitosis to form a ball of cells called a modula. Further divides by mitosis to form a hollow ball of cells, which is called a blastocyst. Okay. Before we go there, yes, this form here, these marks are very important. Please make sure that you know the keywords: diploid zygote, mitosis, the ball of cells, which is a modula, further mitosis, hollow ball, blastocyst. Very important. Okay. Right, then we've got a homework activity that we are going to be marking next time when we see you. Next time when we see you, we're going to do genetics, but we are going to also mark this homework activity. So for homework, you are going to get this extract. You can get it on the PowerPoint presentation. Please make sure that you read through it very carefully. It's about ovarian cysts. And then here are the questions for you. Okay, you can take a quick photo, but like I said, it has been sent to you. It's been sent to your school so that you'll be able to access. I think it's also available on Pocket School, the PowerPoint presentation, so you'll be able to access this homework activity. Right, so let's quickly go. We have a few more minutes just to go through a summary. So we first started with the menstrual cycle today. Okay, so we spoke about how it occurs in females, right? And how it in the 28-day cycle. And the whole point of this menstrual cycle is to prepare the body for possible pregnancy. Okay, and then we went on further to say, Sina spoke to you in detail about what happens if fertilization does not occur. Okay, and all we now know that fertilization is, menstruation is then going to occur. And if fertilization does occur, what is going to happen? She also spoke about that. And then I took you from the ovum after ovulation, the ovum is now in the fallopian tube. What's going to happen if fertilization occurs? The sperm cell is going to come. The head of the sperm is going to penetrate the ovum, and then the nuclei are going to fuse, and we're going to form a diploid zygote. That zygote is going to go through mitosis. Fertilization, as I showed you. Let me just reminding you about how the head is entering the ovum, and then the rest, there's going to be a barrier that's going to form so that it becomes impenetrable, right? And then it's going to develop into, we spoke about how it's going to develop by mitosis, the zygote, into a 2-cell structure, 4-cell structure, eventually into a modula and a blastocyst, and that blastocyst is going to implant in the endometrium. Okay, and when it implants in the endometrium, it's going to now grow extra embryonic membranes. We have all the extra embryonic membranes that are going to form. And then you also needed to know all the different parts during gestation, the structure and the function of the amnion, the amniotic fluid, the amniotic cavity, the amniotic sac, the chorion, the chorionic villi. What else is there? Placenta, the umbilical cord. Okay, all of those things you need to know. Right, so that takes us through our lesson for today. This is just a preview of the next lesson. It's going to be next week on the 19th of March, and we're going to be doing genetics part 1. Right, so I hope that you have learned a lot in this lesson, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you.